everyone. Welcome to another ex-vegan interview. And today, my guest is an ex-vegan who took part in my ex-vegan survey study. And her name is Julia. And she went vegan as a teenager at the age of 14 and then led vegan lifestyle for whole 14 years. And she has been an ex-vegan for 2 years now. And today, we're going to study more about her story. Hello, Julia.
Hello.
Our first question that I would like to ask you is what was your personal incentive to participate in the ex vegan survey and study? And also, why did you want to share your story?
Well, the survey itself was just a curiosity for me, to be honest. I have seen a lot of ex-vegans, of course, in my life. Most of them are vegan for a fairly short time, or maybe up to like 7 years, I've heard, but um, 14 years is a bit more of a rarity, so I thought I would be able to contribute something to it. Um, and well, I don't know. To be honest, veganism is not really a huge topic in my life anymore, but there's still curiosity there, you know?
Yeah.
And if it helps some people, I would like some research, to be honest. I'm curious as to what really is going on. And yeah, maybe it helps.
Yeah, for sure, because indeed, studying long-term vegans is a totally different universe than studying like people who were on vegan diet for 2, 3 years or attempted it like for several months and then quit because the phenomena will be totally different. And then I'm very happy to have you here for the interview because your story, like from what I've seen in the surveys so far, your story kind of stands out. So I have a lot of questions to
Hmm.
because yeah, some things I would really love to learn more. So, but let's begin with chronologically with in general what brought veganism into your life. How did this idea came to your mind that you would like to be a vegan? And who or what were your main influences or inspiration?
I knew about veganism when I was quite young because I happened to know a family that at the time I thought they were all vegan. Though later on, I found out that I was mistaken about that, and just the father was a vegan at the time, only for a short amount of time as well. But the family was vegetarian. So, because of that, I got some early exposure to it. I think I always was a bit more of a sensitive kid to those sorts of ethical questions. For example, I remember when I was 8 years old, we learned about how fur was wrong in school. And I remember immediately making the connection that leather was also wrong because it
Hmm.
was also the skin of an animal, right? And then I got reprimanded by my classmates who were like, oh, that's a completely different thing, right? And eventually I had sort of those experiences. For example, I was one of the people willing to eat rabbit meat when it was in the cafeteria someplace, and a lot of my friends were like, "How could you do that? It's a rabbit, right?" And I thought to myself, "But you eat pigs and cows and such, so where's the difference?"
Yeah.
And eventually that accumulated with, I suppose the exact moment was I read in a nutritional book that there is no problem with being a vegetarian or vegan. And I thought to myself, okay, I'll try it. And I think I wasn't really that radical when I started vegetarianism.
Hmm.
But within the next 2 months, I did my own research. I came across the Vegan Society, and I thought to myself, well, if I'm going to do this for ethical reasons, I should go all the way and I should be consistent. And after 2 months, I decided I'd be vegan and kind of got invested in it, really.
I imagine. Yeah, and so that kind of answers my next question because I saw that you were vegetarian prior to going vegan. And I was
Mm.
thinking, okay, if you switched to a vegan diet at the age of 14, when did vegetarianism start in your life? Like, were you 10, 12 years old? But now, yeah, it makes sense that had a pretty quick ramp up
Yeah,
to
yeah.
full veganism pretty much from that point onward. Alrighty. So how did people around you react to you going vegan? Because like I mean you have yes, you mentioned the classmates, now your family. What did they say? Like were they scared of you going vegan or were they understanding? What was the atmosphere like for you?
Vegetarianism was, I think, no problem for people around me. Though I was told by like some people, oh, yeah, my sister went vegetarian for 2 months and she turned back. And to me, that was a bit of a no, I'm gonna be a vegan for or vegetarian for the rest of my life. You just wait, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think the more pushback was when I went vegan, which my mum thought that was a much more extreme thing. And she said, oh, it's going to cause problems when you go out and with eating socially and such, which she was obviously right. But after a little bit of a hurdle, my mother actually mostly went vegan with me. She wasn't as strict as me ever. She still ate things socially with people because she avoided conflict, but she actually the two of us have a very similar palate and we both like vegetables and such. So at home, we practically, the family was vegan, with my father sometimes having some other things as well and going out to eat.
I see. Makes sense. Actually, yeah, the thing with parents actually with older generation, it's always like that. They're like, why put the label? They kind of avoid labels, but they're willing to be mostly plant-based usually. So it's a pretty common theme, like especially like with my mom too. She's like, why label? Like, why go vegan when okay, you enjoy vegetables, just eat vegetables. You want meat to eat meat. You don't like if even if you don't want to eat it every day. So there is this aspect of neutrality, I think that's more prevalent in older generations. So I can totally see that.
Yes, my mother was pretty much like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You mentioned that you read the book about nutrition. Were there any other resources, maybe some resources that would tell you precisely what to eat, how to supplement? What were the informational outlets for you to design the diet? Because how did you know what to eat as a vegan to be healthy? Like,
The the book that I mentioned was actually not a nutritional book at all. It was like a cooking book that we got
hmm
in school. Because we still had cooking as a subject, and um, the main bulk of information that I got was um, from the internet. And
hmm
I mentioned already that I got a lot of information from the Vegan Society, which is where I heard that OB12 can be a problem sometimes. And I never like supplemented regularly because I really struggle taking medication every day. Like I just forget for a lots of
hmm
periods, like for long stretches, I forget, and then I go back to it a little bit. But I have over the 14 years pretty regularly, and I'd say 50% of the time, try to supplement B12, which is probably one of the reasons why I haven't had that many problems.
hmm Makes sense. Yeah, with B12 subject, there's so much goes into it, and you probably will see other people when I post the study. A lot of people do supplement with B12, they still end up with problems. So it really depends on so many things. So, but yes, diligently supplementing with B12 is definitely something incredibly important, as I find out.
It's also possible because of my Korean heritage.
hmm
I continue to regularly eat seaweed,
hmm
um, kimchi, fermented foods. I can make those at home.
hmm
Um, it's possible that that has also played a role in negating some of those effects. The thing is, I don't think I paid too much attention to my nutrition overall. I always just ate sort of what I wanted to, what I felt like eating, what was convenient. And during the time where I was still living with my parents, a lot of that was whole food.
Mm-hmm. Good. So, but you also mentioned that before you went on a vegetarian diet, vegan diet, you also followed the national diet, and you mentioned that you have of Korean heritage, and apparently the culture that like the food culture is carried on in your family. So, what was your national diet like? Basically what background did you come to a vegan diet with? Like what? Because it's a huge difference, right? How many nutrients did you manage to accumulate in your body before you switched to vegan diet? I'm asking this question partially with the intention to figure that out. So, what was your diet like
Mm.
before you switched?
Um, my family was always very whole foods, home cooking based, and because I grew up in Switzerland with half Korean heritage, my mother is Korean, and she was the main cook, so I very often got, the kind of diet that would probably be labeled as more whole food based normally. Um, Very far away from the standard American diet.
Mm-hmm.
I was a kid that didn't like sweets. I didn't,
Mm-hmm.
um, you know, I didn't have junk food really. I liked seaweed. I liked tofu. I liked the kind of things that my mother would cook. Um, it took a while for me to like vegetables, actually. It wasn't too long before my veganism that I even started liking and eating vegetables. But
Mm-hmm.
but still, it was mostly a more traditional diet, which actually probably helped me a lot because in my early stages of my veganism, I did follow quite a whole food diet, mostly vegetables, mostly um, foods that I was cooking myself. And I learned to cook as well because when my parents were like, "Oh, what are we going to cook?" I was like, "No, I can do it. I'll cook
Mm-hmm.
something."
Nice.
And I was fortunate to grow up in an area with local farms and such.
Mm-hmm. In terms of animal foods, what were the animal products that you were eating before you switched? What were the meats that were typical in the diet?
I ate a lot of eggs.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mostly ate fish actually
Mm.
because I don't know,
Nice.
that was just the kind of things I liked. I did occasionally have chicken, less so beef, sometimes a bit of ham, but I wasn't a huge meat eater before
Mm-hmm.
either. So um, going vegetarian felt really natural to me.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. So, and then do you remember the beginning of your veganism? Like, how did it feel? And did you have some like honeymoon period when you were particularly excited about that lifestyle? Or, for example, what health effects were you observing when when you made the switch from more like omnivore diet to vegan diet? Do you remember that period?
It's a little hard to say because, of course, it's been quite a while now. And I don't actually remember putting a lot of focus on how I felt health-wise. I was possibly a little bit troubled at the time, even before going vegan. So a lot of what I remember is, that my troubling teenage years where I was having trouble fitting in with other people. I remember getting into a lot of conflict with other people because of food matters where or even a family member gifted me a scarf and there was a bit of wool in it and I threw a
Mm-hmm.
tantrum over it, those sorts of things I remember quite well. But when it comes to how my body felt, no idea. I wasn't focusing on that. I felt normal. um there probably were some health consequences over time, but they were so gradual that I never associated them with veganism.
Mm-hmm. Now, I guess when you come from very wholesome, very good diet, the contrast will be not visible. If you go from whole food omnivore to whole food vegan diet at first, of course you won't notice the difference, I don't think. It's usually probably people who go from like standard American diet and then they start eating more whole foods. That usually does magic in terms of how people feel. And
Oh yeah.
so that's probably what creates that honeymoon phase in terms of specifically the physical well-being. But mentally, you said that, yeah, you're mostly like focused on ethical, I guess, aspect of that.
Hmm. I think I remember saying something like, "Oh, I don't care if I die on a vegan diet; it's the right thing to do," sort of thing.
I see.
I was very ideologically driven and quite headstrong at the time.
Yeah, if I remember myself at the age of 14, I think I wanted to become an artist. Yeah. I didn't care to do anything with the sciences in school at that time too. So yeah, I was like, I would rather die poor an artist. So we've been there for different reasons, I guess. So I saw that you said that you followed whole food diet, but I also saw that you followed a junk vegan diet for some period
Hmm.
of time. When was it chronologically, and um, like what influenced your changes in the type of the diet?
Well, the big influence was I moved away.
Mm-hmm.
So I grew up in Switzerland, which actually has a very good food culture, right? I think when you compare European countries, Switzerland is one of the healthiest countries in terms of just diet and such, with high number of people just eating whole foods. And I moved to England.
Mm-hmm.
At the age of 20, I went to England to study and I started living on my own. And for the first time, really, I had quite easy access to what you would call vegan junk food. There was a vegan store right next to my university, which had lots of chocolates and lots of biscuits and the fake vegan products. So I made a habit of completely changing my whole food diet to this store-bought stuff that was new and exciting to me at the time. And that was honestly the majority of the rest of what I spent eating when I was vegan. Around the end, I started trying to switch away, but it was really until um, I decided, no, I'm going to go completely off veganism, completely off junk food. That that thread followed through because it was just so easily accessible. It was cheap, and in the UK, then there's not that many vegetables available at a store.
Hmm.
You just have to say. Switzerland had a much more diverse array of vegetables and whole foods available at a supermarket. So a lot of the things that I would usually eat fell away. I couldn't find anymore. And it just happened through laziness, through availability, through my circumstances.
Yeah, when you're a student, especially, like you're busy. So you don't want to spend time in the kitchen. You barely have time for that too. So I understand that aspect too. It's like when you have access to something that you read, like, okay, it's nutritious enough. It's food. I can get by with it. You just pop something in the microwave and you have food in 2 minutes. So
Oh, yeah.
when you're bothered with this much of homework to do, you're already like deprived of sleep
Oh,
and such.
goodness. I remember times where I would effectively eat all of my calories in a day just of chocolate. And I would be like, well, I've eaten chocolate. I don't need to eat anything else, sort of thing. It's kind of crazy but if you think about it, but I did have that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's coffee and sweets era sometimes happens in your life. The next question I have is if you were to look back, you started veganism effectively as a child, as a teenager, right? And then you quit when you were in the end of your 20s. So you lived pretty huge chunk of life as a vegan with like a bunch of milestones. You became an adult. You got your education. You established your adult life and stuff like that. It's a huge transformational period. And so after all of these years, when possibly like veganism should have become your identity, pretty much, as I would imagine.
It
How did
did.
you start how did you start contemplating quitting it? Like how did it become possible to you? What happened?
So I think there were two shifts. In my sort of mid 20s, I stopped being an activist.
Mm-hmm.
I had a lot of sort of revelations in terms of how a lot of the things I thought when I was a kid were wrong in general. So I stopped, stopped being a bit of a communist, stopped being so concerned with like environmental and ethical problems. Um, and I kind of mellowed out a lot. And over that time, I still held on to my veganism because it was just something that I was used to, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I started saying that I was a habitual vegan because I kind of just lived like that. So I started having contact with people who weren't vegan, going out to places, just um, not being that strict about it in terms of ideology. I still held on to my diet strictly. I brought separate meals when possible, or people would start accommodating me at that point. There
Mm-hmm.
was enough knowledge around veganism as a subject that they were like, oh, we got some, I don't know, a vegan version of this meal for you. And I started living my life less like, no, people who eat meat are murderers, and I am deadly against it. But because it had become such a core part of my identity, I didn't let that go for a while. It was only a couple of years later that really it started dawning on me that my own health had gone down, and my then boyfriend, now husband, who had started being vegan together with me when we started dating, his health also had suffered. And I was starting to realize that veganism was something that the corporations pushed. It was something that was becoming quite mainstream. It was becoming something that was touted as being health benefits. And maybe I am a bit of a contrarian. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
I am someone who is like, wait a minute, if the government is pushing this, can it really be good?
Mm-hmm.
you know? So
Yeah.
I started doing more research on health, nutrition, and it was also around the time where COVID became an issue. And I was a bit skeptical of um, what had happened during COVID. So I think, in short, I let go of a lot of the baggage I had and the emotional connection, and wondered whether it was really the good thing to do, whether it was really helping my life, especially considering that I'd gone down the junk food route, which I could really feel the effects of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's understandable. Another thing that you mentioned that you noticed that it started infiltrating some mainstream agenda pretty much. And especially I think the moment of the events of 2020, let's word them this way, 2021, they probably opened the eyes of many people to what is happening and on what scale and how much leverage those organizations have over people's life
Hmm.
because a lot of people like me included lost jobs. I lost an entire career basically due to that. And so, yeah, with that too, I had also a lot of skepticism about the vegan agenda too. And I remember, I think John Venus actually was bringing it up that with veganism, and partially because he saw that corporations started investing so heavily in it, it became they basically bought into this idea and started propelling it. And at that time, I thought that no, if you're so, why would I change my principles and my personal preferences because now it becomes some like favorable agenda because I probably also try to the kind of happen to be a nonconformist side, of those things. But then eventually it just became too much for me as well. So I started seeing a lot of problem in that.
Mm.
So but with all of that understanding, you spent 4.5 months contemplating quitting. So when you understood something, right? So you started thinking that it might not be the way. What was happening over that period when you were in doubts about veganism? Like, what was your thought process? Why did you hesitate? Like, because some people may say that, oh, you understood something, you act on it. Why wait for months, like before you actually take an action?
I mean, a lot of it was fear because I'd never really, um, I didn't make decisions back when I wasn't vegan, right? I was 14 at the time,
Mm-hmm.
and it was the first time where I took charge and made my own food and made my own decisions as to what I was going to eat. Um, so I didn't really have any experience with anything other than veganism, really. And I was afraid to make those choices. In fact, the first thing I did was I talked to my now husband
Mm-hmm.
about my worries, and he admitted that he would probably feel better going omnivore. And he was never quite as strict as me. He was always doing it a bit out of a favor towards me, right? So I told him, maybe it's more important that we have a bit of whole food, and I will start making meat for you because I
Mm-hmm.
know that you can't do the whole food vegetable thing because you just don't like it as much as I do. And he agreed to that. And I said, I'll just tentatively dip my toes in a little bit and we'll see where it goes from there. And I struggled a lot with, the classic sort of fears are like, oh, I heard somewhere that you shouldn't wash your meat in the sink because the bacteria would go everywhere. And then I had that same fear with washing everything that touched it. And I was like, oh my God, how am I going to do this? Which sounds really silly, but I went through
Mm-hmm.
that phase and my palate wasn't used to it either. When I first tried things, I was like, this is kind of I'm not sure whether I will enjoy this or all of that. And it was a very gradual process. I changed my mind multiple times. I'm like, no, I'm staying vegan, and then it's a week after. I was like, no, I'll give it a go, and then no, I'm actually. It was a habit sort of thing,
Yeah.
and eventually, after cooking enough food for my husband and trying a little bit at a time, I kind of got adjusted to it. And the thing is, I still don't. I'm nowhere near carnivore. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I really enjoy vegetables. I really like salads, and when my husband tells me, you know, what you consider a small salad is what I would consider a big salad. Those sorts of things. Um, but I kind of came to rediscover the things that I did like from before I went vegan. So mostly fish and eggs
Mm-hmm.
and yogurt, actually. So a couple of things I really like and I really enjoy. I genuinely think that it was just I needed to get rid of the habit because I had never experienced anything else.
Mm-hmm.
So that took me a while. I didn't
Yeah,
really
that's.
have too much trouble with the ethical part because that had been something that I'd already left behind a long time ago, and I
Mm-hmm.
had just carried the habit with me.
Yeah, it's actually I know some people who are also habitual vegans, and I imagine it's insanely hard to actually if you don't have like forced exposure to eating meat to like for example you don't like share household with someone who eats meat, or like I don't know, some people maybe like they feed their children meat because they don't like make them vegan or something. Some circumstances, maybe pets, maybe you
Hmm.
get a pet and you like start seeing meat can be eaten, stuff like that. Yeah, it's really difficult to just start seeing animal foods as foods again. And I don't know how it works like that because there are studies, somebody referenced that uh vegans, when they're shown meat, like images of meat, they on the surface they report that they feel disgusted, but when they measure some response in the brain, they actually respond to meat as to food. So there's some like deeper than conscious plane of perception that still sees meat as food. even if consciously you understand that it's something so inedible.
I think there is, this is a bit conjecture, but I think just culturally speaking, when you look at all sorts of different um, populations, during famine, they will often resort to eating, even insects and uh, primarily leaves or potatoes and such. But almost all cultures think of like delicacies
Hmm.
as meat products, so or fish products or anything sort of animal based as more high quality. And I think there is some sort of biological basis for that. So
In retrospect, how soon do you think you should have quit veganism? If like, assuming like your best interest for yourself, when do you think you should have quit? If it was easy to quit, if if you had an understanding, like after how many years of following veganism should you have quit, in your opinion?
it's hard to say. I mean, maybe I would argue I shouldn't have started in the first place, but that's not really an answer, is it? um, I quit at the time I did because all the factors lined up.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in terms of health benefits, it's possible that I could have had a lot of health benefits had I quit earlier, but I don't know necessarily whether it would have been any better to go to just a junk food normal diet either. So,
That's fair.
um, you really, I really struggle with giving you a good answer for that, really.
I
Um,
feel respect that. Yeah, I appreciate that. Because although, like, I mean, those should have questions are kind of dumb, but at the same time, if, for example, you realize something, then it might be easy for example, when you're a vegan, you don't understand that this and this are caused by your diet, for example, right? Like
mm,
these and these problems. But then when you quit, you realize that, oh, it was due to malnutrition, for example. And so that started like 3 years ago, and I didn't know that it was because of my diet. And so that
oh
that was
yeah.
probably, if you had anything of that kind under your belt, then it would probably be easier to answer this question. But if things were more like smooth for you, then another aspect, yeah, you're very right that the options you were choosing effectively between junk vegan and then possibly some other questionable diet. So what is better? We don't know. So I mean, you always you basically always act in the best interest of yours to the best of your knowledge. So yeah. You said that your entry to eating animal products again was kind of smooth because through the exposure of your husband to the animal products, and you were helping to prepare those meals for him. What were you experiencing when you yourself started to eat eggs for the first time? Like, what were your thoughts? What were your feelings, emotions, any physical effects? Like, what was happening during that transition period for you?
There was a little bit of disgust, I think, initially.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I can't believe I'm doing this sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that being said, I think it was fairly mild. I had left a lot of my preconceptions behind for a long time. So I just kind of felt weird. And I didn't do it again for a while and then sort of just eased into it. The thing is, it was neither the like, oh my God, this tastes horrible, nor the, oh, I really miss this.
Mm-hmm.
It was more of a, huh, this is food. But I think I did come to like things more over time. I don't know, it was just strange.
That's understandable. Yeah, it's like somehow, I don't know, somehow this little act of just eating a new food turns your world kind of upside down almost. I don't know. It's what am I doing? And I remember that too when I was eating that fish that I bought, and it felt like a dream almost. I had some derealization moment because And again, it's just food after all. Like in the end, at the end of the day, it's just food, but somehow it feels like some initiation, some like strange global process. I don't
I
know why it
think
happens that way.
I think when I was really ideological, uh, it would have felt like desecration almost because I had this idea that, of nature of animals being sacred in some sort of way.
Hmm.
And at the same time, I never, when I was a teenager, I was quite misanthropic. So I did not necessarily consider myself part of this thing that needed to be preserved, or had quite a stark separation, and also like the idea of humans are bad, humanity is bad. If we didn't exist, it would be better. So there was, to sacrifice an animal for me, that would have felt wrong.
Hmm.
But by the time that I had really made the decision to try to go omnivore effectively, I had laid that to rest. And it was the final step of acknowledging, oh, it's not that different. Plants are alive, animals are alive, I'm alive, we eat each other to survive, that sort of thing. And it was a slow, confirmation of that sort of change in my mindset.
After eggs, however, eggs are inanimate, right? So eggs are its own thing. I think it's easy to start with eggs after quitting veganism. But how soon did you start eating other animal foods, like animal products? And what was it different for you in terms of how you perceived them? And how did your body was responding to other animal products as well? And what was it again? Was it different than eating an egg, let's say?
It wasn't that different.
No?
I think I tried a couple of things in fairly quick succession, chickens, um, fish. And then for a period of time, I was like, oh, this isn't really that special. I didn't really miss it. I'll go back to being vegan, as I said. And then, things just sort of happen and we're like, no, why am I so afraid of these things? It's nothing special. And in terms of physical changes, I didn't experience any until like 2, 3 months down the line,
I
after I
see.
started regularly eating things.
So now you've mentioned that you started noticing changes in your body after you started regularly consuming animal products. And it took you
Mhm.
several months, no, a couple of months pretty much, to start noticing that. So, what were those changes?
So the main change that I think is relevant is that after I caught a pretty bad case of the coronavirus very early on. This was the alpha strain, the very first wave. Um, I had started experiencing pain in my back. And it was a very strange kind of pain because it was exacerbated by movement, but it was kind of a mild, sort of like almost numbness feeling, like electricity
Hmm.
prickles going through my back and front, torso area. And I had been going to multiple doctors trying to figure out what it was. And I had done MRI scans, blood tests, all of those sorts of things, and no one knew what it could be. My blood tests were normal. Nothing really was, no matter what I did, it wouldn't go away. After a while, I had quit my then um, sort of, I had like a part-time job,
Hmm.
and it involved me moving things around, and I had to stop that because it was getting to the point where it was kind of unbearable. It was not constant, but very frequent during the day. And weirdly enough, despite the fact that I still don't know what it was, that went away after about 2.5 months of not being vegan anymore or having animal products, I suppose. But that being said, it did come also with a switch to whole foods. So now I don't have any processed foods if I can help it. Um, I essentially buy my meat and eggs and such in one piece, as you would recognize it, and my vegetables, whole. And I cook from scratch whenever I can, partially because I have the luxury to now.
Hmm.
And that dual switch, together with, I think, yeah, I switched to mostly using butter over vegetable oils. That's another thing I did. And I'm not certain which of those changes it was, but the pain went away completely. And I am so grateful towards it. And the thing is, I'd never associated it with veganism or junk food consumption because it was just happens at such a random time.
Hmm.
It had only been 2 or 3 years that I had it. Obviously, that's a long time to have pain for, but I didn't mentally associate it with my veganism or with the junk food I was eating because that had all happened years and years before that. And it just got better. The second thing that I noticed in retrospect was that my sleep had gotten much, much better. I was always a bit of an anxious person, and I still can when I have something happening, lose a bit of sleep. But it was quite bad where I would, stay up until 4 or 5 in the morning and then um, lying in bed, and
Hmm.
then be tired the next day. And I noticed my sleep quality dramatically increased. But it was more of a moment of, wait a minute, I haven't had sleep problems recently. I would just go to bed and I'd fall asleep, which I didn't really remember ever having
Hmm.
before then. And
Sleep at
yes, sorry.
Sorry, I was want to comment on sleep, but yeah, continue. I'll comment later.
The third thing that you could maybe argue was affected by was my depression. And I had depression before I went vegan. In fact, it was something I struggled with since the age of 11. So I'm once again not quite certain what it was that affected things because a lot of things changed in my life during that period as well.
Hmm.
But I went off my medication, my depression medication for the first time in ages, and I completely recovered from, suicidal thoughts, all symptoms of depression, really, to the point where now I would say I'm completely cured. Once again, is it really the fact that I was eating meat and other animal products? I'm not certain. I couldn't guarantee it to you, but they did coincide.
Hmm. You mentioned the switching though from plant fats to animal fats or plant oils
Yes,
to animal fats. Um, I guess when we think about the vegan junk foods, if you look at any label, it's always canola oil, soy oil, sunflower oil, all sorts of oils.
absolutely.
Usually they're packed with those, the mixtures of those. And that does screw up the fatty acid concentration in the blood. So it's really difficult to keep omega-3 high on a vegan diet, even if you eat like flax seeds, even drink flax oil. Conversion
Yeah,
rate is fairly low for most people. So maybe that's something to do with that because, and plus also I don't know, like nerves are also some system that does suffer due to several likely deficiencies that occur in a vegan diet. And
hmm,
so with sleep though, when you mentioned the sleep, I remembered my sleep on a vegan diet and I remember when I started eating animal products, I started falling asleep so easy. I started sleeping so well as well, to the point that I don't get up in the middle of the night, don't wake up almost ever, unless again there's some stressor, some like mental stress going on. But when I was raw vegan, it was always like I'll just stare at the ceiling all night. Oftentimes, it was pretty
I think
debilitating.
likely there were some deficiencies that I had, or some other like dietary factors that just aren't recognizable in a standard blood test. I never did like those in-depth sort of tests or anything when if my results, on a fairly generic test came mostly in the good range, and I was fine with that. But I know that it's not always possible to tell whether you're deficient in certain things with that kind level
Mhm.
of insight. So it's quite possible that I was deficient, and it just, I don't know, cured a lot of the things I was ailed with over time.
Yeah, it's very difficult even like when you know what to test for, it's often that you literally need to, I don't know, threaten the doctor to schedule the test for you almost. It feels almost impossible to get some test done. Even if you're like, well, here's money, please take my money, get it tested. They're like, nah, I don't want to. Why would you want this test done? Like, I'm a vegan. Please test it. I'll be like, I don't want to. This is my secretary. All concerns to my secretary now. Stop messaging me. That was my that was my case pretty much.
I see.
But yeah, I don't know. Interesting. It would be interesting to see, of course, like HDL and omega-3 levels probably for those to determine what it could possibly be. Because HDL statistically is usually lower in vegans. So and then yeah, omega-3 is one of the other common things, one of the common deficiencies among like different like outside of different vitamins and such. And that's you need to see in dynamics, and then omega-3 test is also needs to be tested in a certain way. And
Unfortunately, I just don't
difficult.
have that data.
Me neither. I would be really curious though to collect that, but it's not trivial for sure. Your current diet though, like what is it like? Who maybe I don't know, maybe you follow some nutritional advice now, maybe some outlet inspired your current dietary choices. How did you decide what's good for you to eat? Because you mentioned like eat butter, so and animal fat is kind of portrayed in the mainstream as something evil, but you do it. So what resources made you recognize the importance and benefits of certain foods that you're eating now?
Well, I had sort of heard the rumors and mumblings a little bit about keto and such, right?
Hmm.
Um, and doing a little bit of research in that, there are some commonalities that many people seem to agree on. And one thing that I could also reconcile with my experience of the world. For example, I know that in Switzerland and South Korea, obesity rates and disease rates are lower than
Hmm.
in England, where I currently live. And just comparing sort of a bit of common sense with different kinds of advice, I was able to gauge, okay, so eh, when it comes to foods, the industrially processed food seems to be a definite um, cause of a lot of health issues. Um, and if you want to avoid those, you're going to have to eat something else. And yes, there is a bit of demonization of saturated fats, but it didn't feel like there was as much evidence, real world evidence, to really say that that was the biggest problem. The most shocking thing to me was that a lot of the modern diseases that are attributed to saturated fats and such were almost non-existent during the times where there were no alternatives. There was no, um, vegetable oil. So I thought to myself, there is probably a reason why we ate the way we ate for a long time. And I was trying to go back to more a traditional style of eating. I initially didn't concern myself too much with, uh, having low carb or anything like that. And to this day, I still allow myself a reasonable amount of leeway right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not super strict on like measuring anything. It just doesn't really come that naturally to me. But I have started to lessen my rice intake and have vegetables and then eggs, fish, those sorts of things that I enjoy. And quite frankly, I feel quite a lot better overall. And I still have traditional foods, Korean foods, even like things like sauerkraut and such. I really enjoy that because, Switzerland, so that's sort of a little bit of German thing.
Mm-hmm.
I like cheese. You know, but I try to look at the ingredients and see that things have been minimally processed.
Mm-hmm.
And if possible, just make things fresh. That's it, really.
Yeah, I think actually I'm just making cooking whole food dishes and buying high quality ingredients, I think will buy like 99% of health for most people, unless they're very metabolically unwell. And that's when they need to employ some like strategies like completely
Hmm.
eliminating carbs or completely eliminating something else. But for most people with good level of health, I think that's pretty sufficient measure. And I respect this approach and I probably follow that myself as well. So just
I
very high.
do,
Mhm.
yeah. I just there are some people who completely demonize all carbs, for example, and sugars. Uh, but it just doesn't line up with my real life experience. My mother is incredibly healthy at 72.
Mhm.
She can go on hikes, on like proper hikes, daily. She lives on her own. She's very active. People always mistake her for at least 10 years younger. Um, and she has a very traditional diet. She likes a lot of vegetables. She eats rice. She does eat some meat and animal products because she said then, oh, when you get older, you need a bit of extra protein and such. That was always something she said. But she doesn't have a lot of processed food, and I think that's the main thing that I really took away.
Do you have any tension around food now? And in general, did veganism change your relationships with food? Um, in terms of, some people go to some like full blown EDs from observing any diets with any restrictions. Was there element of that in you? Did you notice any, I don't know, any element of that in you after quitting veganism or during veganism?
I think, like most teenage girls, I did go through some disordered eating phases, but I don't think it was necessarily ever connected to my veganism.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I actually think it was more moving to England. Um, I had a lot of weight fluctuation during the time where I uh, pretty much only survived on junk food, and even, the things that weren't complete junk were, eating just white bread and such. Um, and during my teenage years, I had a bit of bulimia-like symptoms, purging, binging, those sorts of things. But considering that that went away after a while, through some effort on my part, and also through, I had like a time where I lost like 8 kilograms on a regimented calorie restriction,
Mm-hmm.
effectively. I don't know. I've had those periods. I've had those periods of my life, where I effectively was really just counting down the hours until when I can eat again, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's hard to say that was particularly related to veganism. I think it was more of a phase in my life where I was struggling with eating, and especially the rapidly changed food environment that I was in made it difficult for me to moderate my eating. And now I'm thinking, oh, no wonder I was struggling to not eat. Um, all the things that I was eating were encouraging me to just binge, and I knew that was wrong somehow, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Mhm. That makes sense. Yeah, it's actually what I noticed too. It's when I watch certain like vegan influencers that are more not in the ethical, but more in the health. Again, different like that promote certain like corrective diets, certain specialized vegan diets. Like you should avoid fats at all costs or something like that. So all of those diets. I often see the pattern that they promote that look, you can eat as much as you want. You can be stuffed with food, but you will be thin. And that is I think is a magnet and breeding ground for EDs. I guess, but I guess those things will inevitably attract people with EDs or with tendency to have them because
Yeah.
those like enormous portions. And I was also a raw vegan, so raw vegan diet implies that you eat enormous portions of food. And I'm happy that I probably did not have an inclination to binge as much because otherwise I feel like potentially it would be difficult for me to suddenly not eat it's like elephant portions of food. I actually was looking forward to not eating as much. And when I switched to animal foods, I realized that this much of food gives you satiety for half of the day. And food literally becomes just some pleasurable thing that happens 3 times a day. And I am not like terribly dependent on it. And I'm like not needing to snack all the time or like
I
sedentary,
am
like what will I make next? Like,
I am
sorry.
actually surprised regularly as to how not hungry I am. I still have sometimes the habit of, oh, it's been a while since I've eaten. Shouldn't I eat? And then I'm like, but I'm not hungry. Is this wrong? You know, those sorts of things. That does happen.
Yeah. But it's quite enjoyable. I don't know. It's when you eat foods with so much nutrient, such a nutrient density, it does feel so good. And yeah, I'm not.
I've always enjoyed food.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. And finding ways to eat like in some balanced fashion when you enjoy it, when it feels good, when the outcomes are good, is really rewarding. I love it. So you mentioned also that veganism stopped making sense to you ethically sometime way before you quit it. Like, how did you, maybe back then, how did you resolve the ethical, moral debate for you, like environmental debate for you? Because right now we see actually a huge uprise, a huge inertia of that notion that we all need to go vegan to preserve the planet, such that our offspring has the planet to live in. So, such rhetoric. So right now it's very loud. But is like how did you answer that question to you? Like how did you justify not being vegan in terms of ethics and environment pretty much?
Mm, well, firstly, I think I started caring about humans. I think that is genuinely um, the biggest change that I had in terms of mindset. And when you start caring about humans and not just about all the animals, you start seeing that there are trade-offs for a lot of things, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Um, Animal farming, factory farming especially, can be quite bad. I recognize that still. But at the same time, the giant monocultures are not that much better either. They are massively destructive for the environment,
Mm-hmm.
actually. And the amount of pesticides and um, environmental destruction that happens is not that great either, you know? So, yes, it would be nice if we could have that fantasy that I think sometimes vegans have, where um, it's effectively a Garden of Eden full of plants, and we just walk
Mm-hmm.
in it and pick off the things from the ground, and the animals frolic in the grass. But but reality really doesn't look like that, unfortunately. If you want to have that amount of grains and protein, you require massive amounts of land, tractors, fertilizers, sprays. You know, it's it, there's quite a few negatives to having those large amount of fields. Not to mention that not all kinds of land supports the same kind of farming. So
Hmm.
in a lot of cases, you imagine yourself that, oh, if I don't use, uh, if we used all of the land to just grow, I don't know, corn or whatever, right? Then we could feed the entire population. But corn doesn't always grow in on all of those plots of land. It also tends to destroy the environment sometimes, where um, grazing animals really keep the ecosystem balanced and thriving, while monocultures can deplete the soil quite drastically. So you go from a very simplistic, oh, animals bad mindset to actually there's a lot of nuance to this. And depending on the circumstances and the um, exact configuration, even, there can be goods and bads from both animal and plant farming. Not to mention that, a lot of insects are dying in the name of plant food being made as well. So generally, the entire debate, I think, is a lot too one-dimensional. When people are saying, "Oh, meat has this much more emissions or something," that's a very attractive, simplistic way of being like, "Oh, more of this, less of this," sort of thing. But the world is a lot more complex than that. As a 14-year
Yes.
old, I didn't understand any of the nuances. I thought communism was a great idea, those sorts of things. But when you grow up, you notice that you cannot account for everything. Theory does not always work like how you imagine it, because
Preach, preach, preach.
there's a lot of more complicated things. And ideally, we would all try to eat a little bit more sustainably, but I don't think that that necessarily involves us all going plant-based, We need to watch and look out for our environment. But those simplistic messages of, oh, if we just replace all our plastic straws with paper straws, or if we just, I don't know, have recycled plastic or whatever, those narratives are often much lacking in real world impact.
I super agree with you. And when you start researching anything, literally anything, my first rule was, if something looks too good, you need to dig in because there's everything that we do in life is optimization problem. And so when some solution is somehow so perfect that you can be a good person, you can at the same time you are not like hurting anyone, you are not harming the environment, and everything just works so magically that we can like I don't know, just grow this phenomenon out of proportion, everything will be so good. It never works like that. And so I worked in solar cells, but one of the things that's interesting about solar cell, for example, if you, for example, make a whole field of them, right? The solar cell, yes, it will produce you energy, but it will cast a shadow on the land underneath it. So you are inevitably stealing from everything. Any process that happens in nature, it has some dampening factors, it has some resistance, it has some payback. And you mentioned insects die in the fields. Insects dying cause what? Who eats insects? Birds, small animals eat insects. So you disrupt the food chain there. Even if you don't immediately kill the birds, you don't kill those small animals through the farming, which also happens during that. But you introduce disruption in the ecosystem. And recently I was standing at the bus stop and I live kind of like outside of the city, so I have a field with cows near me, near the bus stop. And I don't remember if I took a picture or not. I hope I did, or my bus arrived. I don't remember. But I see the cows, and right there are birds standing by the cows, and they all eat something together. I guess the cows eat the grass. The birds maybe they disturb bugs or something, so birds are more interested in coming there to like maybe pluck the worms out of the grass or some or out of the soil or something, or eat bugs that fly out from the grass that cows eat. And it was such an idyllic picture. Now that I imagine the field with all this huge machinery going across, literally just desertifying the land. Actually, you mentioned corn. Corn sucks out all the minerals from the soil. Corn creates the desert. So what are you going to do with that afterwards? Nothing will grow after corn. Maybe beans. I don't remember the sequence of rotation to like kind of refertilize soil, but plants will never do what animals can do in terms of fertilization. And another absurd argument to me is that, oh, predators must go extinct and create the Garden of Eden, that there were no predators in the Garden of Eden. I recently learned that this idea is propagated in the vegan community.
Oh, really?
Yes, they are not
Fair
just
enough.
anti humans. I think Vegan Teacher promotes that. Some other speakers too. They say that, or spokespersons, I'm sorry, they say that all predators are evil and unethical. And I'm like, did you study biology at school? Did you study the biological role of predators in the ecosystem? You do not want to live on Earth without predators because neither you want to live in the world without bacteria and fungi because you will create enormous populations that will be limited only by food supply. Populations of like herbivorous animals, for example. And when that
But
happens, they'll have diseases. They will have natural mortality. So it just going to be apocalyptic. I don't know.
the distinction between animals and plants that vegans strongly make is also a little bit arbitrary. And in a similar way, I think where does predator start and where does prey stop, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Because everything is eating other live things, with the exception of maybe some
Parasites.
organisms, but
Parasites
but
probably are the top of the food chain.
I don't know. But the point is that everything sort of feeds on each other to a certain degree, even if it's dead matter, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's it's very difficult to draw a distinct line between who is a predator and who is not. Sometimes, like many times, animals are both.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. It just, like I said, I think it comes from not understanding the world well enough. And I mean, I'd like to think that as a 14-year-old, maybe that was excusable. But um, as you grow up, you should start to realize that the world is not as simple as you think it is when you're young.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean it's regardless of age. I mean, it's it's easy to find this information because again, you find it to be pretty popular. It's popular information, first of all. So you start researching that, and the arguments are pretty good. The arguments are pretty good, and we usually learn. In general, I think humans do what they have strong enough motivation to do because we're naturally lazy. And so you're going to study only if you have some internal incentive to study. Like
Very
imagine
true.
how difficult it is to make a child who has inclination for, let's say, math to make them study languages. You really need to spend years explaining to them why languages may be useful for them, such that they feel the internal motivation to do that. So for us, it's any activity requires very strong motivation, something that comes from our internal needs, and some things that we feel is essential. So you are going to stop studying until some new stimulus comes your way and forces you to study more. And so that requires some deep dissatisfaction sometimes when you learn something that's enough for you to feel very harmonious and satisfied currently. So that's, I think, fair for any age person because another thing is another restriction that we have in life is to have 24 hours in our day
Very
to do
true.
things. You cannot just study just everything in the world and be as thorough and rigorous in every pursuits that you may be remotely interested in. So I wouldn't blame yourself or like try to justify that. It's totally natural for any, regardless of age, regardless of education, regardless of anything. So, then another question I have. Do you miss anything about being vegan, about your vegan days? Would you want to revive anything from that period?
I don't think I really have anything like that,
No?
quite frankly. I suppose one thing that was nice was it did feel like I had a bit of an identity, but
Hmm.
I have since found something else to identify with, so it's not like I miss anything, no.
So it did leave so I don't know. I mean, it's a pretty all-encompassing thing about your life. I mean, when you're vegan, and indeed you mentioned the identity aspect, and it comes with a lot. It comes with recipe for life. It comes with pre-made philosophy. It comes with lifestyle recommendations and such. So ditching it and going into vacuum is probably quite difficult. So I don't know if you're open to talk about what it transformed into for you. I don't know. Feel free to share if you're comfortable with that, unless it's something like very intimate. But I would be
No,
interested.
no,
What came in place of that need? Because if you had an identity, you had the need for that identity, right? So
yeah.
what came in place of it?
I think ideologically it was just I became a lot more family oriented, I think, and more about preserving traditions and well, me and well, I got married, um, trying to have a family myself. Those sorts of things really shifted my perspective away from some sort of grander identity, like ideological identity, towards, oh, I am part of the family, I'm part of a lineage, I will be continuing that lineage, those sorts of things.
Hmm.
I don't want to go into too much detail with those sorts of things, but no, I found a purpose in life sort of beyond a purely ideological one, right?
Hmm.
And even when I was vegan, yeah, I had an identity, but it was a bit of an isolated identity with people online share that identity, not I'm like the people around me are all part of what I am, so
Yeah.
that shifted a little bit.
So you mentioned that you start feeling more aligned with your lineage, with your roots. And I had that moment as well. And it was very, 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 very good. I don't know. It was such a satisfying feeling that you're back to the world, to your origins. And I don't think that it was something that I created in my mind. It just came very naturally. It wasn't something that I had to sit and think about, like, oh, wow. No, it just came. So
That makes sense.
we're coming close to the end. Kind of have a few questions left.
Yes.
I don't know. Are there any lessons that you learned from being vegan? Like, or I don't know, was it rather neutral in the context of your life? Neutral experience?
The most humbling lesson that I only really learned in retrospect was probably just how wrong I can be
Hmm.
and how, I jeopardized quite a lot of relationships and just got into lots of conflict with people over something that I think back on now as being relatively minor and trivial. In the grand scheme of things, I should have valued those relationships that I had with people much more than this ethereal idea that being a vegan means you're a better person.
Hmm.
It's something that I kind of regret
Hmm.
because you can't really fix the things that were already broken back then. Some of them you can. My parents have forgiven me for all the rather annoying things I did, but some people I will just never see again because of that. So, yeah. I think that's the main thing that I learned, but that's more sort of like a life lesson. Veganism itself, um, I don't know. I guess it did make me alert to some of the bad things about farming in general.
Hmm.
And I do think there's some value in that, really. We do need to be a bit more alert to how our food is produced and how the corporations really abuse the fact that they have so much power over people. But that's not necessarily something that veganism solves because
Hmm.
it's just such an extreme thing
That's
that
it. It's the other side of what was happening for the past, like, I don't know, 50 years. It's just the same thing, but the other side of it.
mm,
I think so anything that goes into that level of controls usually starts lacking a lot of humane aspects. So you cannot make any industry humane pretty much. So it's only when it's human to human that's when we can be humane. When it is human against a machine, some identity that only has legal name that's behind multiple levels of some like legal walls that you can never like trace a person behind it. It loses it loses its humane nature. So no matter what it is, I think it will inevitably be dehumanized at some level of growth. So when yeah, something scales up so much, it also loses all ethical premise and ideas behind it. So in terms of the humbling lesson, I cannot agree more with that. And it's like when I felt like I know guilty dog or something when I came off of vegan diet because I realized how awkward I might have been. And yeah,
oh,
it's
I did some terrible things, including like yell at restaurant staff and walking off in the middle of a meal. Uh, I was I was a very disagreeable child. I call myself a child, teenager.
mhm. Yeah, at that age, yeah, it's probably you react probably more even more like passionately to things. So yeah, it's understandable. Now for the lessons. And I guess this next question will kind of be maybe related to that. If you met someone and you build trusting relationship with them and they tell you that they want to go vegan, what would you tell them?
Um, it probably depends. I don't think it's a saying, "Oh, don't do that. It's bad for you." Is necessarily um always the right thing to do. But I probably ask, "Oh, why?" And do you think it's going to help your health? Do you think it's ethically something, or is it because of the climate? And I think there'd be a lot of things where you could really pinpoint what the reasons are and then see if those reasons really hold up to scrutiny.
Hmm.
But quite frankly, I would be like, you know, being vegan for a couple of months is most likely not going to hurt you if you're a healthy person. Like, if you enjoy, you can try it, but there might be some side effects, you know?
Starting with questions, yeah, it's a good point because it would help. But when you ask someone a question, it helps them as well to understand their motives. And then, yeah, maybe, I don't know. I'm just trying to recall myself like back in the day. Would I be susceptible to information other than something that interested me in the moment? Would I be, if someone like offered me, like, no, read this book, it will change your mind on veganism? I probably would be like, it's something I want to do. But then understanding
It's
why I
quite
want to do.
possible.
Yeah. Understand?
No, from my experience, just giving people something to read never works. They rarely ever read whatever you give to them. Not even like a 5 minute video. That this
Hmm.
doesn't work, you know?
Yeah.
There has to be some sort of personable aspect to it. You have to be genuinely interested and try to form a connection or a relatability there that makes them value your input, you know? And if you're very hostile about a topic, which I am guilty of in many cases, I am not saying I'm a perfect being who can persuade people. No, but from experience, if you're hostile to people, they'll be hostile right back.
Hmm.
Just how it is.
It's probably also from the height of vegan experience, height, I don't know, height, not height. If we ditch the hierarchy, I guess just having that, I think what would be cool to do is actually to help a person preserve their relationship with you. Like, kind of, I don't know how to do it, what the mental mastery it would be, but to save a person, help them preserve themselves from ruining relationship with you because of veganism. That like being that understanding person, maybe that's something that would be valued by that person down the road. I don't know. If they do go vegan and then they say something, they do something such that they don't end up in the situation like you described when you start regretting all the relationships that you threw away because of that. I don't know, just some thought.
Maybe. To be honest, I haven't had any experiences like that. I've when talking to other people about this subject, most of the time, uh, they're like, "Oh, okay," but I do have the occasional person that's like, "Oh yeah, I was vegan for like a year or so." You know,
Mm.
those sorts of experiences I have, but I'm probably the most avid vegan that I know.
It's interesting though. I like relatively recently encountered a person who has been vegan for a while, and like we just met. We started talking that I was an ex-vegan, and it was so much tension. I came home almost with a headache because I felt like, was I saying something wrong? Was I saying something? How was it? It was just like all this reverse analysis was pretty hard.
I think people just are afraid that that you're going to be like, yeah, I was vegan too, but I couldn't do it, so you clearly can't do it, you know? And that's not something someone wants to hear, you know?
Mhm. Yeah. Then we touched up also on corporations, on all those things. From where you live, from your experiences, do you feel like there is a merge between corporations, governments, and in some vegan organizations, I guess, some agencies that promote this lifestyle in general with vegan markets and such? Do you feel concerned or just being observant about some resonant events being like propagating plant-based vegan way of life, way of living, way of eating, like Olympics, for example? Then we had an event that White House went vegan. Basically their cafeteria adopted vegan diet menu and stuff like that. Do you observe those phenomena that shift? What do you feel about it?
I'm of two minds. There's certainly a push uh, to do this. And I don't think that the main reason is anything climate or ethics related. I think it's because, yeah, you can save a lot of money if you just put soy protein in foods instead of meat or things that are generally considered food, right? But the public has started seeing, the label vegan as better than other things, which was certainly a concerted push for quite a while, right? From like climate activists or whatever. When really, um, I wouldn't be too adverse to it if they were trying to say, okay, uh, why don't you grow your own garden so you have more fresh fruits and vegetables and such? But it's really focused on having those replacement products and the vegan label sweets and whatever, right? Which effectively all you're really doing is replacing already questionable um, ingredients with like a little like whey powder or um, gelatin or whatever it is with even more questionable chemicals, right? To label it as vegan. The foods were never healthy in the first place. Um, on the other hand, I think that many people have a very instinctive aversion to those sorts of things in particular. My father, for example, was always like, I don't mind eating vegan things, but I won't touch replacement products. And I was initially like, why? It's just I don't know. I think I had a cheese at the time that was made out of potato starch or whatever, and I was
Mhm.
like, it's just potatoes. You eat normal potatoes, right? But he had this instinct for no, it tastes kind of weird. It looks weird. It's not right, sort of thing. And I think most people do have that instinct. Um, they sort of instinctively know what's good for them, and I think veganism will never truly catch on because of that. It might be pushed, and I actually think there's a good possibility that many people will be like, oh yeah, having the occasional vegan thing is just part of life. But I don't think you can get to ethical veganism through that sort of channel. Consistent veganism, it would be more, oh yeah, we'll have less meat products or less animal products, which personally I think is probably not a good thing for health, but we'll see. Um, in the end, a lot of it is determined by individual people. And of course, humans are resilient. You know, we've gone through starvation periods, we've gone through war. Um, we as a species, right? We've gone through many periods of hardship, and people have adapted to eating really bad things or really little, um, and have made it through the other end. So, well, we'll see what happens.
Just seeing how susceptible most people are to the programming of different kinds. That's what kind of maybe concerns me because I treat like if we look at everybody as consumers, like I myself a consumer of foods, what might concern me about this promotion is that, for example, price of meat may go sky high because I believe that same people who control processed foods, they also control other foods as well.
Mm,
So that's
yes.
something that I may be concerned about, that there will be some um artificial push towards like forcing people basically to choose other options. But then uh, the incentive for them is that you mentioned that, yeah, they replace one ingredient of animal origin with like multitude of ingredients of plant origin. All of those are businesses. All of those are companies that produce those things. They wanted to be in demand. And so I made a post on my page about comparing vegan croissant with normal croissant, like butter one. And there are like twice many ingredients in the vegan croissant. All of those are
Yeah.
produced by some factories. So they're synthesized ingredients.
I feel like it's going to get worse before it gets better. I'm more talking about, well, on a grand scale, it will
Hmm.
probably pass and they will probably get better, especially because we already see a lot of backlash against this whole, well, all the food culture that comes from America, effectively.
Hmm.
But no, you're completely right. People do believe it when associations say, "Oh, saturated fats cause heart attacks, and you should eat more of this and less of that, and salt is really bad for you, and you should eat, I don't know, cereals for breakfast." It does absolutely influence people, and it is up to individuals to kind of resist that. And I'm not sure how things will go.
I think, I mean, I believe that anyone would like anyone. has a domain. Everyone has a domain and space for their interests to be met in some way. So that gives me optimism about it. And perhaps there's also, I mean, every force creates a counter force as well. So likely there will be just reinforcement of the forces that go kind of against the grain as well. So, and eventually, like, what I don't like in general about the dynamics of the world, especially in the era of the internet, is that every phenomenon that originates, right? It usually gains some traction and then it starts being noticed by big businesses. So they pick up on that and it creates so much potential that instead of like some steady, balanced development that we see in nature, it goes through huge intensity oscillations. Like it has huge hysteria around it and then huge backlash. And so it creates, I mean, in some sense, it creates some entertainment for people, I guess, to just dwell on and have some thrill in life. But at the same time, it creates so much more destruction than if we were just more careful, more thoughtful, more rational about different processes, as opposed to just dumping a bunch of money, a bunch of investments in something, seeing if it works, then destroying everything while testing it. And then when it breaks down, we just make more profit from solving some problem that we just created. So it's like it's just too psychotic for my taste, I think. And so same
I
thing with that.
wouldn't really know what to comment on that, but I'm sure it's happening. I just stay away a lot from social media and such.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like sometimes you just get exposed to the news and stuff, so that's involuntarily. So, and being in the subject of I feel like I just got exposed to all of this when I started talking about ex-veganism, and
Hmm.
so I just live in the bubble probably, so there might be some defect in the informational field in my end, but I just see more of that just because of nature what I do.
It's quite
All right.
possible.
So it's good to hear your take on that. Sounds very balanced, and there might be some egotistical component for me to hear that just to feel more comfortable.
Don't worry, I'm not nowhere near an expert on that. It's just a guess.
No, but you are an expert in perceiving that, so and your understanding of things is just a showcasing different perspective. And you're clearly a very educated and smart person, so
Thank you.
um your opinion weighs a lot. So then quick question: veganism for you, never again or depends?
I'll probably have days where I have nothing but vegan food, but it'll be an accident. Yeah.
But as a like phenomenon, it's just adopting it and following it again.
No,
No,
no.
you don't see
I
yourself.
think I'm past the rigid dogmatic thing.
Hmm.
Um, there's just a lot of better things I could be investing my resources into, really. And when it comes to health, which I am concerned about, I I don't know. I think the focus for me going forward, at least for the near future, will be just sticking to food the way nature intended food to be,
Hmm.
and beyond that, we'll see. Really,
Nice.
I don't know what all the right answers are, what causes what disease, etc. I just know, from common sense, the kind of food that is sold in supermarkets in little colorful packets doesn't seem to be the greatest food. And that's really the most base instinct that I go with.
You have very good baseline, actually, I think, because some people they were never introduced to certain foods at all. They don't know, especially in the US. Sometimes that as children they had just a handful of highly processed foods that they ate and
Mm,
some wholesome things, but they just don't have even like a taste palette for that. You're talking about the intuitive perception of food, intuitive aversion to certain things, and intuitive draw to certain things. But for some people, it's not like that. So
maybe, yeah.
that really depends what you were exposed to as a child, actually, in most cases. It takes a lot to
Yeah.
relearn.
No,
So,
I'd always had that just from how I grew up. For example, I when I was first introduced to cereal, I was like, no, this isn't breakfast food.
mhm,
This is a snack, this
mhm,
is candy, effectively. So I don't know. Maybe it's just how I grew up then.
mhm. Yeah, it might be that, yeah. But that's what I often see at least. And yeah, from my experience too, like I was also for the most part I was eating whole food diets as well. My mom was preparing food from scratch a lot of times. And so I was very familiar with that. It's like a lot of foods like that are not they don't even exist in the US. I had as a child. They're totally normal. Now here you have to go through some exotic aisles or something like even like liver. It's so funny to me because liver is conventionally eaten in Russia in a multitude of recipes. Here
Hmm.
you go on some carnivore blog or some like YouTube channel to see like, yo, liver exists. Look at this. It's a superfood. And I'm like, oh, superfood, nice. We stuffed crepes with it or crepes, those like things. And yeah, it was not a super low calorie keto lunch for us. It was something that we normally eat.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh,
absolutely.
and for them, it's like super healthful. So, and then the last question that I have is pretty general. Like, in your opinion, what can every human do to make positive impact on the world? In your opinion?
This might be an answer that is quite colored from where I'm at in my life, but I think every human should aim to have a family and raise children well.
Hmm.
Because ultimately, right, yeah, you can do a lot of activism and such, but you can really shape the future through your children and how you raise them and how you pass on your values. And it's something that I've come to realize really once I got into the age where I was thinking about having children, that my parents actually did raise me quite well, all things considered, In comparison, I could have had much worse exposure, but um, starting from the very fact that my mother always did home cook and teach me how to cook and how to take care of myself, without that, I would struggle quite a bit coming back to that sort of lifestyle. And she had the luxury of being at home to raise me, and those sorts of things did have an impact on how I lived my life, even though I did stray for a while, had a lot of outside influence, internet influence. I was terribly terminally online when I was young. Um, but eventually, that influence is still there. And I think everyone can have a pretty big impact on at least that part. And the future is the children.
Yeah, very well said. And yes, yeah, this foundation that parents give you is something that you always can fall back on. It's that strength that they give you by I don't know what it is, what they put into you, but what you imprint as a child will always be the most core thing for you, and you can always fall back on that, and that's a huge component of personal strength and resilience. So I'm really happy that you had such experience and that you came to valuing it so much and understanding of that. It's really amazing. I'm very happy for you.
Thank you.
And I really love this advice as well.
Oh, and thank you for the interview and everything.
Thank you
Really,
too.
I hope that it will help someone out there.
The thing is that how susceptible are you for this information in the moment where you're at? Because some people would probably objectively need to be helped before they realize it. But everything comes at its best time, I guess. I'm really grateful that you took part in the survey and found time to participate in the interview as well. It was a great
Yeah,
pleasure talking to you.
no worries. As I said, I look forward to the survey results and watching all the interviews myself.
Great. Thank you so much.
No
And
worries.
guess I will be wrapping up now.